Welcome to the Greatest Philosophers in History series, where we delve into some of the most influential ideas and viewpoints concerning human existence. In this installment, our attention turns to the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche was a German thinker of the 19th century, acknowledged as a radically transformative figure in Western philosophy and intellectual heritage. He was a sharp critic of the social norms and religious frameworks of his time, especially of Christianity. Nietzsche's life was fraught with difficulties. He endured exclusion from the scholarly community of his era and was burdened by chronic health troubles that persisted throughout his adult years, culminating in a sudden end to his productive period. In 1889, Nietzsche experienced a complete mental collapse. While walking along a city street, he witnessed a horse being whipped. Rushing toward it, he embraced the animal's neck in an attempt to protect it, then fell to the ground. Following this incident, he never recovered. Although he was initially diagnosed with syphilis, alternative explanations later emerged, suggesting a manic-depressive condition accompanied by intermittent psychosis and dementia, potentially linked to a slowly growing tumor. Nietzsche passed away in 1900. During his lifetime, his writings attracted little interest, at times selling scarcely a handful of copies per year. His works truly gained prominence only after his death. At that point, his sister Elizabeth took charge of editing his unpublished manuscripts to align them with her own beliefs, which were strongly tied to Nazism. As a result, Nietzsche has often been erroneously portrayed as a precursor of Nazi ideology, a misunderstanding rooted in his sister's editorial alterations. In truth, he held negative views toward anti-Semitism, which is evident in his texts. He actually admired Jewish contributions to European culture and regarded them as intellectually significant. During the short time after his breakdown, he composed what have come to be known as his madness letters, sometimes signing them as Dionysus or the Crucified. Dionysus, the Greek god of fertility and wine, exemplifies a passionate affirmation of life, whereas the Crucified references Jesus, whom Nietzsche described as the one and last true Christian, emphasizing that authentic Christianity ended with his death on the cross. This stance is less an attack on Jesus personally than an attack on Christian doctrine for focusing on an imagined afterlife, which Nietzsche regarded as an ultimate rejection of life in its immediate form. He believed that the root of human discontent and anguish lies in how we divide our experiences between yes and no, insisting that happiness arises only when we perceive yes, and sorrow arises only when we perceive no. By doing this, we give up control over our well-being to forces beyond our power. His suggested approach was a more fatty, meaning a wholehearted love for whatever fate brings, becoming someone who affirms existence. Among Nietzsche's works, Thus Spoke Zarathustra laid the foundation for his overarching vision, which he considered his principal achievement. He followed it with Beyond Good and Evil, another influential piece. Nietzsche's writings were not tailored for the average reader. He aimed instead at a select intellectual audience. He has also been acknowledged as a pioneer in psychology, proposing theories like the will to power. To him, psychology was paramount among the sciences, with a profound influence on our decisions, thought processes, and philosophical beliefs. He frequently interpreted mainstream ideas from a psychological angle, questioning our foundational assumptions and emphasizing how unstable they might be, all while offering a reimagined way to value life. He advocated freeing ourselves from oppressive customs. Central to his philosophy are ideas about self-overcoming, perspectivism, human nobility, the will to power, the eternal recurrence, and the overman. Nietzsche greatly stressed the notion of Selbstüberwindung, or self-overcoming. He described it as expending intense energy or emotion through creativity or some form of personal endeavor. Pain, in his view, is inherent to living. It should not be shunned, but rather tackled head-on to foster personal development. By trying to avoid it at all costs, we deny ourselves the chance to grow stronger. The question he poses is whether we are truly free when we make the world around us simple, superficial, and pleasant. Nietzsche contended that such an environment is actually falsified. To find delight in living, we should confront reality in its entirety, including the negative facets. To him, the darker aspects of humanity are as necessary as the lighter ones in advancing our collective human potential. Consequently, he emphasized the importance of appreciating adversity. Our existence inevitably involves pain from the moment we are born until we die, but Nietzsche insisted that running away from it is not the solution. Instead, he urged people to face hardship, as only by overcoming obstacles can we develop into more complete versions of ourselves. He used the metaphor of a mountain climb to illustrate this. Climbing is painful, filled with struggles, but only from the summit can we behold the most magnificent panoramas. No one else is ever going to see those views unless they have the courage to undertake the climb. He also remarked, in essence, that our perspectives on truth and reality depend on how we see the world. This is perspectivism. It implies our knowledge can never be entirely valid in an absolute sense. Given this, no single philosophy can claim ultimate truth, yet we might formulate unique standpoints that reshape how we interpret existence. Nietzsche predicted a generation of free spirits, those who seek only their own truths, declining to impose them on others, and who stand apart from the majority. He used the term Vornamite to signify human nobility, which is not a mere collection of facts or knowledge. Rather, knowledge has to be fully lived. How much insight can we actually bear before it weighs us down? The nobility he envisioned appears in those who keep a certain distance from most people and from common ways of thinking. He referenced the pathos of distance, highlighting a distinction between ordinary individuals and nobler souls, a gap that separates the exceptional from the mundane. Nietzsche was anxious about cultural decline, not just about personal lapses. He wanted to nurture outstanding people who could spark cultural renewal. Still, he did not aim to uplift everyone. The average masses could remain as they were. In his eyes, though he aimed to lure certain individuals away from conformity, fully expecting hostility from the majority. A guiding question for him through his entire intellectual journey was, how should we live? Or, more profoundly, how do we bear life? He depicted life as a tumultuous stream without a fixed point or path. Because of this, he saw no basis for presuming an external or objective meaning in life. Humans inherently organize themselves according to certain values. Without them, life would be virtually unworkable. Since there is no evidence of external values, and yet our nature demands them, we must have an inner capacity to generate values. The bravest souls, in his opinion, are the creators of these values. Their moral sense glorifies their qualities. Self-confidence, self-honor, and disdain for submission are characteristic of a noble morality. Nietzsche thus argued that in a secular world with no transcendent beliefs, modern people need to shape their own values while steering clear of nihilism, which claims life has no worth. One of his most recognized statements is that God is dead. It is not meant as a jubilant exclamation, though he sought to dismantle values that had accumulated over millennia, originating in various civilizations and embedded in contemporary society. He also believed that doing so was both inevitable and possible. This radical shift was what he called the revaluation of all values, a process that could, in his view, eventually lead the human race past its current state toward a new form of existence, exemplified by what he called the Overman. In declaring the death of God, Nietzsche pointed to a historical transformation. For centuries, God was central to the lives of many, but is now merely one aspect of life for some. Religions and believers continue to exist, yet God no longer defines reality. And that is why, in his famous phrase, God is dead, Nietzsche described Christianity as rooted in a slave morality. He criticized people who cling to it, labeling it a mentality that stifles reason and fosters a state akin to servility. While evil tends to evoke fear in the slave morality's eyes, in the so-called master morality, it is the good that seeks to inspire fear. He saw the giving up of freedom, pride, and confidence as a servile act. By contrast, The master morality tries to shape new ways of living without suppressing personal power. He saw Christianity as an arrangement of subservience and conformity, a system that teaches its followers to hate earthly existence by fixating on a supposed eternal paradise. In Nietzsche's estimation, diluting our perception of life and masking its difficulties moves us further from reality. Since humanity mostly has a history of obedience, he believed it predisposed people to follow commands. And when someone shows real independence, it is often labeled dangerous or evil, as it threatens the established order. Therefore, he viewed Christianity as a limitation on human growth, transforming potentially strong souls into timid, compliant creatures. And beyond good and evil, Nietzsche probed why we have values to begin with. What is their essential role in lending meaning to existence? He examined how people convince themselves that life has a purpose rather than succumbing to nihilism. His view was that humans typically invent true world beliefs, whether it's Plato's realm of forms, or the Christian heaven, or even the Hindu notion that individuality is an illusion. For Nietzsche, these frameworks are human inventions designed to cope with life's difficulties, and they reveal how we sometimes impose comforting illusions on reality. This perspective ties in with his broader doctrine of perspectivism. He also explored how moral convictions like compassion and justice arise within society and questioned whether such values mask underlying motives, including frailty or self-deception. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche depicts the prophet Zarathustra returning from a decade of isolation in the mountains, proclaiming a series of teachings. He presented 3 stages of transformation: the camel, the lion, and the child. Most people, in his analogy, remain camels throughout their lives. They bear society's rules and demands like burdens on their backs, rarely questioning them. To break free of this state, one must shed these constraints, which allows a person to evolve into the lion who confronts the fearsome dragon named Thou Shalt. On every shining scale of this creature is a command, representing centuries of tradition. Gaining true autonomy requires challenging that dragon. Ultimately, having done so, one can be reborn as the child, free from old constraints, discovering the world anew with the curiosity and openness of youth, affirming existence with a resounding yes. Beyond these phases, Zarathustra's 3 core lessons revolve around the will to power, the eternal recurrence, and the overman. Nietzsche proposed that everything in life, from creation to destruction, is governed by a will to power, a fundamental force that propels beings to realize their true potential. In his view, it is not merely a drive to survive, as Schopenhauer suggested, or to amass knowledge for its own sake. Rather, knowledge is only valuable if we live it. The will to power encourages us to become our truest selves, surmounting whatever ensnares us. Nietzsche believed this principle underlies all our actions, even if it remains dormant or unrecognized. He further held that the finest afterlife is actually another repetition of the same life we have already led. This notion is the eternal recurrence, in which the strongest, most life-affirming individual would relish the idea of living precisely the same events over and over again. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, when Zarathustra starts speaking publicly, the crowds mock him, assuming he's nothing but a showman. Nietzsche thus illustrates the conflict between the exceptional figure and the ordinary masses. The term Übermensch or Overman describes the individual who has completely mastered the art of self-overcoming, an elevated being in contrast to the last man, that complacent figure who prefers to blend with the crowd. The Overman stands for self-mastery, which Nietzsche saw as the toughest challenge. If happiness stems from the sense that our power is growing through surmounted obstacles, then this Overman is the happiest of all, giving life its most profound purpose. With his flamboyant writing style, Nietzsche's works can feel like a mental stimulant, prodding readers to question whether certain treasured ideals about themselves and the world are as stable as they appear. We tend to view ourselves as moral agents aiming for decency, guided by shared cultural expectations and convinced of certain unassailable truths. Nietzsche, however, would encourage us to see meaning as something we create, not something we passively discover. For him, the Overman represents a future truth, an embodiment of new values that replaces old dogmas. Concepts such as the will to power, self-overcoming, embracing risk, amor fati, and the eternal recurrence all serve as Nietzsche's signposts for finding life's worth.